Welcome to True Wellness with Dr. D, the podcast where we explore what it takes to live with vitality, balance, and purpose. I am Dr. D, and each week I'll bring you powerful tools, inspiring stories, and expert insights to help you thrive in every area of your life. From health and wellness to mindset and navigating life's challenges, this podcast is your guide to creating a life of true well-being. Let's get started. Okay, welcome everyone to True Wellness with Dr. Z. I am excited to have you here for another episode, and I am joined today by Coach Robb Beams. Coach Robb, as they call him, he is a renowned expert in human performance, and he's got over 39 years of experience. He is only 21, as you can tell. He's got all this experience, though, helping athletes to achieve their peak performance. And he uses a holistic approach to training, which is why he is on today's show. You see, his expertise, it spans between fitness and nutrition, but also that mental development that is required to be an athlete or even to just be improving yourself on a general basis, as well as recovery. But, if you're an athlete and you don't spend the time recovering, you're not going to be an athlete for very long. So this is important, whether you are a pro athlete or whether you are someone who is just beginning on that fitness and health journey. So Coach Robb, he is, passionate about teaching people about the why between what it is that he does and his training concepts, which, as you guys know, it is really important because when we understand why, we can actually go ahead and begin to make those changes, understanding what we're doing. Makes a big difference in our success rate. So Coach Robb, he provides his clients with knowledge and tools so that they train smart, they prevent injuries, and they experience that long-term success. He is also the founder of Complete Racing Solutions. So he works with world-class athletes, weekend warriors, and even just individuals overcoming their own physical challenges. So Coach Robb, I'm excited to have you joined here today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I know you're extremely busy, and it's an honor to be on here with you.
Yeah. So just for some background, my sons ride motocross, and, I have no idea about anything about motocross. My son desperately tries to have me learn, and I pick up little bits and pieces. But, about a year ago, we came to this point where I was watching my son physically struggle. And a lot of my clients are, menopausal women. They're looking to lose weight, not gain weight. And so I'm like, I need some help here. I really need some expert advice. And that's how I came across Coach Robb. And I'm really excited because his approach isn't like, some of the other trainers and coaches out there where it's all about the next fad or the next push or things like that. It's really about helping these boys and girls develop bodies that can operate at their peak performance. And so I'm excited because I want to talk all about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances to it for sure. And the one thing that I think is so fascinating is it doesn't matter if you are trying to lose some weight. It doesn't matter if you're trying to put on muscle weight. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself a weekend warrior or you get you're in a situation where you get paid to actually be an athlete.
Yes.
As long as you're breathing air, as long as you have warm blood, the physiology, the nutrition, it never deviates. I know you've got some special ops clients that you've worked with. I know you've worked with quite a few athletes yourself.
Yes.
And if you really think about it, there isn't a difference between anybody that's listening to this show, regardless of your background or what you're trying to achieve. Because I always tease, if I hold a pen up and I drop it, the law of gravity is going to guarantee it hits the ground. Now, you and I can disagree with it. We could try to argue with it, but the facts are when we release that pen, it's going to fall. And that's what I always say about nutrition and physiology. As you teased a little bit earlier, I've seen, if you look at strength training, I've seen super slow, I've seen super set, all the way up to and including high intensity interval training that we see today. I've seen zone, Atkins, South Beach. Like you said earlier, these fads that have come and gone. I was fortunate enough, I was at the Olympic Training Center as an athlete for the sport of triathlon. And what they used to always tell us, I was at Colorado Springs facility. And what they'd always say is, we didn't make the rules of nutrition. We didn't make the rules of physiology, but we have to respect both of them. Now, are there nuances on, obviously you can get into things, food sensitivities. You could get into some people need more rest than others. And with a lot of the wearable devices that we have nowadays, a lot of the guesswork is being taken out. There's always that school of thought, like as when we were an athlete, when we at the Olympic Training Center, when we slept, we had EKG all over us. I mean, literally from our toes all the way to our head. They were monitoring respiration rate, skin temperature, and everything else out. Nowadays, we have them right on our watch.
Yes.
And like you were saying earlier, when it comes to recovery, on the work side, there's no new workouts, right? If you're looking for speed, you could do heart rate ladders, negative splits, intervals, whatever. It's the recovery side that people really weren't able to get their hands around because we did not have measurable devices unless they were in a medical clinic like yours, where they could literally be hooked up and evaluated, which is unrealistic for anybody who's listening. So I think that's some of the biggest advancements, but I joke with our staff all the time and all of our coaches, we have never deviated from what we do with nutrition. Now, do we use nutritional periodization? Sure. If you're in a preseason mode where you're maximizing strength, you're trying to drop some body fat, but you're trying to increase aerobic function, increase maximum strength, sure, we're going to bump up protein a little bit more. We get into pre-competitive and competitive season, doing more speed work, sure, we might move that percentage of carbs up to 50, 60, 70%. But the point is, we're not coming up with new foods. It's always going to be fruits, vegetables, lean protein, stabilizing blood sugar with, as you know, fruits and vegetables are low glycemic.
Yes.
We don't have to get into the argument of what if I'm eating a lot of meat, do I have to worry about the acidity, the pH, the alcohol? No. It always balances itself out. And I do have a demented sense of humor. I always like to say it this way, no matter what, somebody wants to come up and try to rebut what you're doing. So if you're eating fruits, vegetables, and lean protein, you'll have somebody that says, oh, you don't want to eat this because it has sugar in it. Well, if you're eating protein, that's going to negate or at least start to counterbalance your son's race moto. If you're running a 2-stroke motor, right? A little bit of gas to a little bit of oil mixture, what do you get? Too much oil, foul a plug, not enough oil, you seize the engine. So when somebody's worried about the idea that fruits have a certain amount of sugar in them, I always say, forget about the sugar content. If you're combining it with a protein, you're going to essentially create the right balance. What's more important is recognizing that if you strip a fruit, you strip a vegetable, you've just stripped a vitamin or a mineral. Vitamins and minerals are catalysts for energy, and we have an epidemic of people who are extremely exhausted. Well, when you start telling people to strip food groups out now, an assumption is we've already validated that you don't have a sensitivity to that food. Yes. If you eat gluten and you have extreme side effects, of course, gluten probably isn't going to work for you. But if you don't have those adverse side effects, there's nutritional value to gluten, which has gotten a bad rap. And we could go down everything from cholesterol to protein, fat, everything that's under the sun. But we always say the things that we did back early that we learned at the Olympic Training Center is really the backbone of what we do. The Olympic Training Center told me this once, and I never forgot about it. They don't get influenced by marketing dollars. They're there to get the very best out of a human being, and they're going to tell you the truth. I don't know if we'll have time to get through this or not, Dr. D, but when we were at the Olympic Training Center, this was back in 91. I was trying to make the Olympic team for the sport of triathlon. They were already testing fructose. But if you go and you look at fructose, right, they'll tell you it's poison, it'll kill everything and everybody. But yet if you look at the hepatic, right, that ability for that blood sugar or the sugar to be absorbed by the liver, which then drives our brain to this clarity, they were already testing fructose back then. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but the sports drink industry is now coming out with fructose. Yeah. So nothing new under the sun. It's like running shoes. You go from the super thick to the minimalist to now we're back to super thick again. I don't know how what used to be smart is now dumb and what was dumb is now smart. So that leads us to where we're at right here. We've never deviated from our strategies. And we're very fortunate. We have the largest online coaching business in the motocross realm. We have 314 number one plates. At the amateur level, we have 4 AMA number one plates. The only reason why I bring that up is we understand the process and the system. But like we always tell the parents, we need to earn your trust by getting results. So as long as you start to see your athletes got a little bit more endurance, a little bit stronger, sleeping better, recovering better, it's not about me being smart. It's about you trusting the process and system on the foundation of what the Olympic Training Center said. There's nothing new with physiology. There's nothing new with nutrition. And I think, unfortunately, our listeners have a tendency to, Monday fat is good. By Wednesday, it's bad. By Friday, they're so confused.
Yeah. I say all the time, we've just got really most issues get resolved when we go back to basics.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes human beings have other things that prevent them from being able to get back to basic. Maybe there's some mindset stuff or things like that.
Absolutely.
That need some shifting. But when we get back to basics, many of the issues that even clients I see, they get resolved. And you're right. It's like these days with social media and everything else, there is all of this, quick, try this, don't do this, don't do that. And it's, most of it is marketing, right?
Yes.
And so we're educating ourselves on marketing versus going back to understanding how the body works. And, I like to say often enough that our body is this incredible machine that knows exactly what to do, how to do it, and we can optimize it, but we've got to give it what it needs, right?
Absolutely.
And if not, then it can't run.
Absolutely. I'll share a scary story with you. We have 4 verticals of business. We have a motorsports division, which is motorcycles and race cars. We have an endurance division, which is triathletes, cyclists, and runners. We have ball and stick, anything that involves a ball and or a stick. And then we have our general fitness and weight loss division. There was a lady that was doing triathlons. And when social media came around, she was always wearing very small bikinis and had incredibly ripped abs. And her whole image was based off of 6-pack abs, hyper lean. And I just really want the listeners to pay attention to this because she came to us. She'd been, quote unquote, a social media guru. For example, we work with the Bowflex model. When Runner's World was out, we had a couple of the cover models for that. We understand that for a short period of time, like working with Lance Armstrong, you get ready for the tour, you race for 3 weeks, but he'll be the first to tell you it's not healthy. It's just what you do to peak.
Yes.
It's not a sustainable lifestyle. Well, this girl comes to us and unfortunately it was a sad story because she said, look, I've been a social media person. My image is everything. I'm out there advocating these wraps and I'm advocating these smoothies and she was the first one to say it's just hogwash. She goes, the reason why I'm extremely hyper lean is I've been shooting up HGH and testosterone for over a decade. And I went to my doctor and unfortunately my adrenals are completely smoked. And the doctor said there's nothing he can do. So she comes to me and says, well, what can you do to help me? And I'm like, well, eat more fat, get more sleep, reduce the stress. And she's like, no, I can't do that. I have to have this certain look. Right. And I just really want the listeners to understand when you see something on social media, and I hate to say this because it sounds so jaded, but there's a reason why we call Facebook fake book. Right? It's nobody puts anything realistic up there. Nobody's going to put the authentic, I'm just having a real shit day, right? They're going to go out there. My wife is perfect. My life is perfect. My kids are perfect at 4.0. Stop. And when you get into the social media side, when somebody says, oh, this drink, this wrap, this exercise, this tool, this resource, it's the answer. It's not the answer. It's never going to be the answer. And it's disappointing to me because this girl has unfortunately ruined her adrenal system to the point that she does not, and think about this, Dr. D, she is only 33 years old and she doesn't have the energy to walk across the room.
Wow.
And she goes to the doctor and the doctor essentially said, there's nothing we can do. And if you don't know, for the listeners, when you start jacking the system up, right? It's like whether you like motors or not, just think about this from an illustration standpoint. If you make a car and you put this huge engine in it, but then you put it in this just wheels that are too small and a frame that's and the motor just keeps breaking the other vehicle parts, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens when someone starts injecting synthetic HGH and testosterone.
Yes.
You start a domino effect where tendons, ligaments, muscles, bones, they can't keep up. So you either end up injured or you end up, I always like the listeners to think about a flow pattern. Cells make up tissue makes up organs make up a system.
You can watch
Well, when you go to that doctor and that doctor says you have adrenal fatigue, you have to recognize that the very top level, your system is now diseased.
Yes.
That's why we're so big on having blood work done every 3 months, because as we were saying earlier, if somebody's advocating that you strip a food group and then you get your blood work back and you're missing iodine and you're missing zinc and a couple B vitamins, well, iodine's going to drive your thyroid. Well, you're sitting here with no B vitamins in your system. Those are your energy vitamins, B6, B12. Those are gone.
Yes.
And it's because somebody, social media expert, right, told you not to eat this because it has sugar in it. Well, what they didn't tell you was the vitamins and minerals, which they all are designed to work together. You get your blood work and you're out of balance. Well, your chances to fix it are pretty simple. And this is where I want everybody, regardless of your background. If you come to Dr. D in January and you're tired and you get your blood work done and you're low in your iron, like precursor to carrying oxygen in the blood, you're low in your B6 and B12, and let's say you're low in iodine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. D can make the recommendation, hey, eat more foods. So we have to wait another 12 weeks. You're eating more food, get blood work, comes back, doggone it, you're still out of balance. So now we recommend supplementation. I own my own supplement company, and I always tell my clients, please don't buy supplements until you determine they're necessary. That's why they're called supplements. They're not meal replacements.
Yes.
Well, now you're 6 months in. You've eaten more food. Now you've supplemented. Your blood work comes back, and sure enough, you're still low on iron. You're still low in zinc. You're still low in B6 and B12. Well, that's when we have to start looking at, maybe we need to start pulling back the volume of training.
Yeah.
Because you ate more food, you added supplementation, and you're still out of balance. If you turn a blind eye to that, guess what? You're going to end up with Addison's disease, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, Now, all of a sudden, the system is diseased. Even though you've gotten all this blood work, you've kind of turned a blind eye to it because some social media guru says, don't eat bananas because it has too much sugar.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? That's what's so staggering to me. And people will continue to stay down that path until, unfortunately, they come see you and you go, you've done too much. I'm not going to say it can't be repaired, but we've got an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Of which, and I always say this, all fatigue-related diseases are 100% avoidable. That's what makes me get so incredibly upset.
Yes.
You've got some so-called social media expert promoting and peddling some product, service, resource, whatever. It's hogwash. You know, it's always about balance. Always start with real food. Walk in your grocery store, shop the perimeter, get out.
Yes.
You've done 90% of the work.
Yes.
When you exercise, make sure that predominantly it's aerobic to reduce oxidative stress, reduce the production of free radicals. That's what makes us look prematurely aged.
Yeah.
So if you know HIIT training, that's a byproduct. Dr. D, think about this. How many of our listeners have heard the word antioxidants? Hey, eat your fruits and vegetables. They're high in antioxidants. Everybody, right? Ask 9 out of 10 people what's an oxidant.
Right.
They won't be able to tell you that it's a byproduct of oxidative stress that comes from high intensity interval training, which is the big fad on the internet.
Yes.
Well, as you bring that heart rate up, you produce free radicals, which produces oxidative stress, hence antioxidants. So 99% of our listeners are exercising because HIIT training is what they advocate. And that's why I'm so vehemently against HIIT training. I love it in textbook concept, but I don't know about you, Dr. D. I've never had one client present themselves that were rested, fed, and hydrated enough to take on HIIT training.
Yeah.
And then add on top of that, hey, don't eat fruits and vegetables because they have sugar in them. So you're not bringing in the antioxidant and you're producing high levels of oxidative stress. And we wonder why our listeners are exhausted and can't drop body fat.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I hear you. It is. We are in a fad society where it's whatever you just picked up, we consider knowledge, right?
Yes.
I'm learning, I'm doing research.
Yep.
Research is scrolling social media. That's not really research, right?
No.
Where that information is coming from, what's correct, what's not correct. And then people end up really confused and frustrated. But I want to talk about that weight loss piece because I think that there are some pretty basic causes to weight gain. What would you say is that number one cause for weight gain?
Stress, 100%. And the crazy part about stress is I have a question that I always like to ask on a podcast. If you woke up independently wealthy tomorrow, what would you eat? What would you do? Who would you hang out with? And then compare that to yesterday. Because, and I ask this as sincerely as I can for the listeners, I would love you, while you're listening to this podcast, pause it for a moment and answer these 3 questions. What is a perfect relationship? What is your dream job?
Yes.
Because unfortunately, you don't realize you might have a rogue boss. If we took a blood sample, your cortisol levels are going to be through the roof because of stress.
Yes.
You're financially strapped. You go home, cortisol levels are going to go up. You're in a bad relationship at home, cortisol levels are going to go up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't eat good food that's processed or comes out, has a lot of simple sugars. It's all going to be perceived as stress. See, that's the crazy part that the body doesn't understand, is where the stress comes from. It just knows it's stressed. And I think that's the silent killer. I think that's the one that, I like to say this to my young parents all the time. When a female becomes pregnant, she goes on her best behavior. She eats really, really well. She exercises. She makes it a priority. She sleeps. Yeah. And then as soon as she has that baby, she goes through that train wreck known as birth, right? Tears the body to smithereens. Hormones are all over the place. Now she only eats when the baby lets her eat. She only sleeps when the baby lets her sleep. And it's so brutal. And then what ends up happening is now her partner, he wants to be amorous. That's the last thing that's on her mind, more stress. Now the baby's crying. Somebody maybe just got home from work. You know what sleep deprivation can do for people. But what I want the listeners to understand is sleep deprivation, stress. Eating erratically, stress. Baby crying, stress. Baby teething, stress. Partner demands, stress. Financial stress. You start packing these on. If we keep taking blood samples throughout the day, blood cortisol levels are through the roof, and therefore your fat magnet is at full tilt.
Yeah.
And then I've got a novel idea. Let's go exercise. So you go to the gym and you just pin the ears back and you go wide open. So you add more stress to an already stressed out system.
Yes.
And then none of us listening to this podcast have an abundance of time. So what happens? Well, I'm kind of running behind. So what I'll do is when everybody goes to bed, I'll do an hour of exercise. So now you sleep less. Now the body doesn't get what it needs, adds more stress to a stressed out system. But wait, I'm running late, so I don't have time for breakfast. So now I hit a caffeine, which is a stimulant, which overstresses a stressed out system.
Yes.
And again, stimulants get a very, very, I think they get a hall pass that they shouldn't.
I agree.
Scary. Mm-hmm. Absolutely scary. And for those of you that might be in the motor world, it's kind of like running your motor with low amount of oil. It can run, but it doesn't run very well. Yes. So what it's doing is it's the excessive amount of stress that comes from the low oil. When you add a stimulant to an already exhausted body, and again, I say this 100% out of respect to all first responders, but why do they struggle with weight? Well, they're asleep when they should be awake. They're awake when they should be asleep. So now their circadian rhythm is goofed up.
Yes.
Stress level is going through the roof. They're living on nicotine and caffeine. It's literally a Molotov cocktail. And you look at somebody who goes into nursing or a doctor or a paramedic or a police officer and look at that freshman 15. It's a freshman 50.
Yeah.
And I only say that, again, for people who don't know me. I've been doing this for 39 years. I'm only sharing with you experience. It's not a judgment call. But to your point, Dr. D, a lot of people come in and go, what the heck happened? I'm only 4 years out of medical school and I'm 50 pounds overweight. But we start getting into it and it's like, oh my gosh, it's kind of, that's why I call it the silent one. You're staying awake when your body wants to be asleep and you're dozing off doing your paperwork or doing your rounds. So you hit some caffeine. And how many times have we seen people who work at the hospital smoking cigarettes outside?
Yes.
Not in a judgmental way. They're trying to find a way to stay awake. And you do that for a decade. Oh, goodness. All of a sudden you're 50, 60, 70 pounds overweight. Stress. Take all of that. And that's why I wanted to really get the listeners to pay attention to it. Stress is your number one cause for overweight.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, it's true. And people don't even realize sometimes that that's what they're doing.
Yes.
We put so much emphasis on breath work and meditation. And, I tell people, if you stop at a traffic light, use that traffic light as your reminder to actually just breathe. I tell people before you eat, pay attention to your food, right? So now you're prepared for your body, it's coming. Take a few deep breaths to bring your nervous system down. But when we're constantly operating in that path, and, I think there's a trap. The trap is that it's going to end someday. I'm just going to do this. I fall victim of this all the time myself,
Sure.
I'm human just like everyone else, but it's
That's
like,
right.
okay, I'm going to just keep going like this until this project gets done or until that gets done. And one thing leads into another. And then there you are, like you said, 10 years down the road. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've been stressed out for 10 years.
Yeah, that's why I say start with if you were independently wealthy, right? Because that's usually the explanation that everybody gives to justify the behavior that we're doing. Right. I don't have time to work out because I have to work. Yes. I don't have time to work out because my little one is sick. If you're independently wealthy and you took all of those elements, but what I find very, very interesting is 9 out of 10 people, when I ask them, what does your perfect day look like? They can't answer it. Now, they'll tell you they don't like what they're doing, but they can't tell you what they would like it to be. Yeah. They tell you they don't like their relationship, but they can't tell you what they want it to be. And I want you to think about this. When you're dealing with an interpersonal relationship, well, I would be happy with you, Dr. D, if you and I would go to dinner. Let's say you and I were partners, and you say to me, Rob, I would be happy if we went on date night. Then we go on date night, and then you tell me it's not the right food, right? So I tried, but I missed the mark because I went on date night, but then you moved the target. So then we go to the restaurant that you want, and then I didn't get there in enough time, or the subject matter. I always want to talk about sexual, intimate things, and you're like, I'm tired of talking about that because that's kind of a sour subject for you. So we went to date night, but the target got moved 3, 4, 5 times. So eventually I just quit trying. So I'm like, look, I tried taking you on date night. You were never happy with it. So I'm just going to give up.
Yes.
Finances, fitness, relationships. Unfortunately, I say they all cross-germinate.
Yes.
Because if you can't tell me what you do want, let's take your son racing. Hey, the motorcycle's handling great. All right, stop the music. What does that actually mean? Because then when you come in and say the bike's not handling correctly, well, what is it that we needed to do so that you say it does handle correctly? They can't answer that. And that's what, like you said, I think it's a trap. I think that's a great way to describe it is, unfortunately, people as humans, we tend to be complainers. It's easier to complain instead of reverse engineering it and saying, okay, what does my perfect day look like? And then what am I doing to achieve it? Could be working a side hustle. It could be, and obviously it gets into some, as we get older, there's a lot more baggage that comes into it because you might realize you're in a bad relationship, have been for years. Yeah, that's a big change. You might think you like your job and realize it's killing you from the inside out. Mm-hmm. This is where the wearable devices have been tremendously helpful for us. I am amazed. The watches will show you when the individual goes to sleep, and it'll show you when the individual wakes up. And what I always try to get the athlete to understand on the Garmin dashboard, that's what we use exclusively, are Garmin's. Uh-huh. You can literally see when someone wakes up and you can see their stress score by minute.
Yes.
When someone's in a horrible relationship, their stress level is higher in the morning before they go to work than when they go to work, even though they don't like their job. Now, that's not my opinion. The watch is picking up respiration rate, skin temperature, all these different variables, right? And then you get to work and then you can literally see when they're driving home, you can see the stress level go up.
Go back.
It's not because they went to the gym. Self-confession here. I love craft beer when I travel. My wife and I, we like to stay at Airbnbs. I like to enjoy the environment that we're at. Sure. And I always like to try the local food, and I always like to try local craft beers. You literally can watch my Garmin stress score. As soon as that alcohol hits my mouth, stress score goes up to a 70. On average, it's around a 70 for me. Now, the reason why I say that is, again, I'll take a spoonful of my own medicine, right? I could sit here and tell you, hey, these watches pick up stress. I can tell you that alcohol will stress the body out. And then I can show you on my own watch when I put alcohol in my mouth, the impact it has on me. So I don't want people to think I live in a glass house. When I say I was married for 25 years, I was in counseling for 15 of it. Okay. So I don't live in a glass house. That's the only reason why I always ask, what is it that you want versus what you've got?
Yeah.
And if you woke up independently wealthy, could you tell me what you want? And you'd be surprised how long it will take people to come back to, like, I never really thought about that. Because you haven't put yourself, and this sounds very selfish in today's day and age, but it's very easy to say, I don't like this and I don't like that. Well, then reverse the question. What do you like?
Yeah.
It's never going to get better.
Yeah. And I think too, as human beings, we're conditioned to survive. Yes. Right. So we actually have to work to look for the other side because we're so conditioned just innately to find the things that are wrong, And so it means we've got to be really perceptive of our thoughts.
Well, here's the hard part, Dr. D. You don't get married and then stop trying. You don't go to the gym, get in shape, and go, okay, I'm in shape now, I'm done.
Yes.
You don't get independently, financially wealthy and say, okay, I've achieved it, I'm done, right? It doesn't matter what area you want to look at, interpersonal, financial, professional, it doesn't matter. It's like I always say, a relationship is not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%. And when you start putting all these elements together, this is why I love the people who listen to your show. Because if they're listening, they're already taking a proactive approach. They're like, okay, I understand that I'm responsible for my success. But then that's where the knowledge comes in. Like, what's the real truth versus the quagmire of misinformation that's out there? But you certainly can't go off social media. We know that for sure.
We've established that.
Yes, absolutely. And we only share those examples because being on this side of the desk, being on this side of the telephone, being on this side of the Zoom calls, it's heartbreaking because you are dealing with, not to get into anybody's personal space. I've got professional motocrossers that are 19 years old that can't get an erection.
Yeah.
That's how their adrenals are smoked. Now, you do a little bit of background. You find out some of them are taking performance-enhancing drugs. They're being told that they have to be at a certain weight for this particular smaller bike to get the whole shot, to get a good start. And this is where I get so frustrated where, like in the motocross industry, we have these so-called SMEs that are running facilities that are essentially ex-pros that really didn't make it, but now all of a sudden they're physiologists and nutritionalists and sports psychologists. And I'm like, wait a second. You stay in your lane, right? If Dr. D is trying to get you to understand caloric deficiencies are going to cause health ramifications, and then you've got some dodo bird that's saying, well, you've got to lose 10 pounds so you'll get a good start on the smaller bike. I literally had this happen. It was a Tuesday morning, and we had two professional athletes. Dr. D, you know him as the MXGP series. Over in the Europe market, we had been hired by two of these guys. They were in the second year of a 2-year deal. They both are riding for factory teams in the MXGPs. And one of the top 450 riders who also was on the second year of a 2-year deal, 450 factory rider. In that day, I had 3 conversations from pros who all 3 of them have adrenal fatigue. And I'm just doing some background. Hey, what happened? The majority of them is, I've got an ex-riding coach who was an ex-world champion, particularly in the MXGPs. They told me I could only eat 1,700 calories a day. Well, how many calories are you burning? Around 6,000 to 6,500 is their burn rate on test day. Okay, so they're being told they can't eat more than 1,700 calories. They're being told by an ex-professional motocross, not a nutritionalist, not a doctor. Somebody who raced pro is telling a young athlete 1,700 calories is all you're allowed to eat. And that's all they do. I mean, they're literally counting almonds, right? I then get a phone call from a young athlete who's here training at one of the facilities, and he's getting pressured by the owner of the facility that he needs to be on a 1,700 calorie diet. It's interesting. You can see the theme that the 1,700, somebody threw it out there that that's the magic number.
Stuck.
That's it. So now what ends up happening is I'm literally having a conversation with a dad and a young rider who's being told by the facility to eat 1,700 calories. And I'm trying to share with them, I just talked to 3 guys who are where you want to go, who have nothing but regrets because they did exactly what you're about to do. And that's the vicious cycle. That's the endless loop that has to be broken. Yeah. And that's why I do appreciate the opportunity to be on any and all podcasts, because if I can get in front of one young parent who goes, hey, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. If I'm stripping a food group, I'm now going to be void of that micronutrient. Well, those vitamins and minerals are catalysts for energy. No wonder why my son or daughter has no energy, because they're not eating the food. We've already validated they don't have food sensitivities.
Yes.
Wait a second, we got to pump the brakes now before it becomes a problem. Exactly. These 3 pros are about to lose $2 to $3 million a piece because their career is going to come to an end, not because of their capability, but because their adrenal system is smoked, which could have been avoided.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part, especially with the wearable device. It tells you what your active and your resting calories are. So when you come to me, Dr. D, how many calories should I take? Well, let's take a look at your burn rate.
Right.
You know, this whole idea, everybody's got these formulas. Yeah, back in the early 80s, that's all we did have. Well, we don't have that. Yeah, that's all we did have.
Cool, right?
Yeah. But for those of us that grew up in the 80s, we remember card catalogs and we remember the McNally map. Now everything is done for you. Can you imagine today's kids trying to go from Florida to Texas using a McNally map? You're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go and is it the right way? They're mad. So you start putting all that together and it's like, okay, and that's what I think is so wonderful about the human performance world. You want to know how many calories you should consume? Let the watch tell us how many you're burning. Try to stay within 100 of those. That way you don't put too much stress on the system.
Yeah.
And then, so that's the left side of the equation, nutrition. And then when we exercise, we go do a max heart rate assessment. And for somebody who may be a little bit overweight, we can do some mathematical calculations to come up with some heart rate zones to ensure that you're predominantly aerobic. Yes. Well, now you're leveraging stored body fat. The lower the heart rate, the more stored body fat you use. The higher the heart rate, the more stored sugar. Well, you came to us saying you want to lose body fat, then why are you going guts to the wall? And I will sit and have an adult conversation with anybody. I don't want to get into the discussion on net calories. It's hogwash.
Right.
Always answer the question, where are your calories sourcing from? Stored fat or stored sugar? What is your goal? Then adjust the intensity accordingly. I will argue this all day long because what I find is interesting is it goes back to how we opened our conversation up today. Mm-hmm. When I was at the Olympic Training Center, I'm sitting here under the tutelage of some German cycling coaches. I'm under the tutelage of a French swim coach. I'm under the tutelage of an American running coach. If I were to argue with them that I'm going to lose weight by doing high intensity interval training, I would have gotten kicked off the team immediately. Because you think about the Tour de France, right? Those guys go out and do 5-6 hour rides at a heart rate of 115 to 120 for 6 hours. Yes. As preseason to get their strength to weight ratios up to melt body. What are they doing? They're melting body fat through low intensity training for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. But now people are like, oh, well, if you lift heavy, you're going to produce more testosterone. I get it in a textbook, but our listeners are exhausted. They don't need more oxidative stress. They don't need to stress the system. What they need is lower the heart rate, leverage more body fat, win. Maximize aerobic capacity, leverage stored body fat, and reduce stress on the system. Win. Yeah. Eat fruits, vegetables, and lean protein every couple hours. Stay within 100 calories, maybe 100 below. You'll burn a little bit of fat. When you exercise, you'll burn a little bit of fat. Mm-hmm. When you satisfy hunger through protein and fat, you sleep better. You release the recovery hormones, HGH and testosterone, wake up with more energy. It's literally that simple.
Yeah.
It's when you start getting into the complexities of, but what about this? And what about that? And that's when Dr. D has to come in and put the gauntlet down and say, no, stop.
I'll tell you how many, we have clients who come in all the time and it's number one, I'm working out 2 hours a day. And the first thing is you're exhausted. You're exhausted.
Yep.
We think about, I've worked with some special forces guys and some, Ironman athletes and such. And they're like, I'm really tired. I'm like, well, when's the last time you actually gave yourself a chance to, when's the last time your body rested?
Exactly.
You're not replenishing any of those stores. It reminds me of the David Goggins story, where he pushes himself the entire time and then he ends up with Addison's, right? So his adrenal completely shot. But that was predictable the whole way through his journey.
But that's where we're supposed to be the smartest species on earth. And you've got a gentleman who told you what his story was. And then people emulate the same story and surprise they will end up in the same spot.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't understand. For the listeners who may not be familiar with, and I always say that an external symptom is a problem of an internal issue. So for example, if you're craving simple sugars, if you have night sweats, if you're tired and you can't sleep, if you have low libido, well, those are one or more. If you have one or more of those symptoms, that's an external sign that your adrenals are getting overworked.
Yes.
And then you look at the idea of your diet. Well, without high quality MCT oils coming in to actually feed the adrenals can't allow the hormones, testosterone and HGH, to do their job. So you literally wake up fatter than you went to bed because of stress, not how many calories. Yeah. I always like the listeners to think about this because I get into this and I'll use the word debate pretty often. I'm not a calorie counter. My thing is know what you burn, and then stay within 100 calories, maybe below that if you're trying to burn some body fat. But do everything you can to reduce the stress, of which the watch will tell us, right? So all the checks and balances are there. No emotion, checks and balances. And sure enough, I'll get somebody who's heck bent that they're like, no, that scale said that I'm up 3 pounds today, so I'm fatter. I'm like, okay, so work with me here. I'm not somebody, we use the scale morning over morning. We only use it for inflammation and swelling, whether that's to measure from exercise or sensitivities to food. So we love the scale, and I hope all the listeners will embrace the scale. Your morning weight over morning weight should be pretty constant. If there's a fluctuation, particularly if it goes up, it's easy to evaluate. Is that exercise induced or is that food sensitivities, which helps cleans up the eating habits?
Yes.
From a sensitivity standpoint. At night, you should always be 3 to 5 pounds heavier when you go to bed every single day. Because when you eat a gram of carbohydrates, you store 2.5 to 2.8 grams of water. So when you eat carbohydrates, you should naturally hydrate. And then you should be consuming half of your body weight in ounces of water. That comes from the Olympic Training Center. Yeah. So now we know you're properly hydrated. And what's fascinating is you look at your evening body weight, wake up in the morning, and sure enough, you're 3 to 5 pounds lighter. You see where this becomes a double-edged sword? Because if we get in bondage to the scale, all you are is chronically dehydrated. Now you start running into the muscles don't slide and glide. You have headaches. You can't focus, blah, blah, blah. But I want to come back to the idea when someone says, nope, I'm heck bent. I put on 2 pounds of body fat last night because the scale went up 2 pounds. Okay. So let's get your calculators out. There's roughly, it's not accurate, as you know, Dr. D, but the Google will tell you that a pound of fat is 3,500 calories. Cool. I'm with you. We'll use that number. So I want you to show me in your MyFitnessPal the extra 7,000 calories you ate yesterday that you're convinced is why you're fatter today than you were yesterday. Mm-hmm. If you didn't eat 7,000 over and above what your basal metabolic needs are, you can't tell me that that's body fat.
Yes. Agreed.
Because I'm not going to argue. I'm not a numbers counter when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is, unfortunately, our listeners have been just beat upside the head with a gong, right? Remember the old Gong Show? Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's mathematically impossible for you to put 2 pounds of fat on. And even if you did eat 7,000 extra calories, it isn't going to convert to body fat in 24 hours. That's another whole conversation for another day.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to hold yourself in bondage to the scale, then you have to let the numbers work both for you and against you. If you didn't eat 7,000 extra, that's not body fat.
So what is it? It's
got to be water. It's all water.
Yeah.
Yep.
They want to look
and that's why I always say to them, if you're eating fruits and vegetables, you should be up 3 to 5 pounds heavier every night because of the vitamins and the minerals and the water content. Yes. The water content, now you're pre-hydrating yourself. So should you decide to get up in the morning and work out, and now what you're doing is getting a day ahead of everything. So if you're going to work out Tuesday morning, you want to go to bed Monday night, 3 to 5 pounds heavier. You're going to wake up because you lose a lot of water through respiration and other bodily functions. But getting in bondage to the scale, being down 5-6 pounds in a week, all you've done is bought yourself dehydration and all of the negative ramifications that go with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's true. Dehydration is one of the biggest things I see all the time. But
yes.
I'm speaking of bondage to the scale. I think that we are also in bondage to the weight loss industry itself, because it's just like this vicious circle, right?
Absolutely.
How do we break that vicious circle? Because I know this is a pet peeve you have, the weight loss industry itself. Yes.
I think it goes back to what we've spoken about over the last 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. If we go back to like what they said at the Olympic Training Center, there's a principle associated with nutrition that can't be argued with.
Yes.
If you look at, and for those of you that don't consider yourself scientific, just take a deep breath and drop your shoulders, because I promise you they're up by your ears right now. Okay. Just imagine that you eat a carbohydrate, a big fancy word, a fruit, a vegetable, a piece of bread, a potato, anything that's considered a carbohydrate. You eat that carbohydrate, and that edible carbohydrate gets converted to stored sugar, known as glycogen. So let those words be interchangeable. You eat a carb, and it gets converted to stored sugar, known as glycogen. You have 2 gas tanks in your body, your liver, which feeds your brain, and your muscles, which feed movement. So that's how easy it is. You eat a carbohydrate, it fills 2 gas tanks up in the form of glycogen. We just talked about the idea that when you eat a carbohydrate, part of that storage of glycogen is the retention of water. And it's a lot. If you do the math, it's pretty astounding. For every 1 gram of carbohydrate that you eat, you store 2.5 to 2.8 grams of water, which is a good thing because we need that for sweat. We need that for thermal regulation. We need that to carry nutrients through the blood. The whole exothermic process is dependent on you having water. For those of you that are motorheads, imagine your radiator in your car empty. Car runs hot. Doesn't get good gas mileage. Wears and tears the motor down quicker. Same exact analogy. So where I get so frustrated with the weight loss industry, and by the way, and I want everybody who's listening to this to Google it if you don't trust me, why is the weight loss industry a multi-billion-dollar industry and has been for 50 years?
You would think it should work, right?
Right, exactly. If it was going to be so profitable, it should have been for 1 year only, and then everybody has a legitimate understanding on how weight loss is, and they should never come back. And this is where, and if anyone's listening to this and they're driving, please just listen. If you're listening to this and you're sitting down, grab a piece of paper real quick. You start a diet at 200 pounds, and you decide that you go and you buy some of these different quote unquote programs that are out there. And let's say you go from 200 and you get all the way down to 190. Now, we already talked about the idea that if you go to the library and you purchase a book, Zone, Atkins, South Beach, all these different ones, right? The book is 2 inches thick because everybody who wants to start a program, what's the first thing they do? They want to go look at what they're allowed to eat. They don't look at anything except what am I allowed to eat?
Yeah.
So the book is 2 inches thick and you're only going to what you're allowed to eat. They want to say, I can have an apple with some almond butter and I'm allowed to have a banana with some almond butter and here's the catch. You go down from 200 down to 190. You have headaches all the time. You notice that you're not sleeping because the calorie gap is too big. So what do? You go, forget it. I'm going to go back to eating normal. And then you go from, this is where I want you to write it down if you have a piece of paper. You start at 200. You went down to 190. You said, screw this. I'm tired of eating like a bird. You notice you go to 210.
Yeah.
And then, oh my gosh, my pants got bigger, scales going up, hard to go up the stairs. So you go back to the old ways. You go down to 190. Yeah, all the way down to 190, right? Because now what you've done, you're really after it. When you get tired of eating that way, what do? You go to 220. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I want you to draw that illustration is no joking. That's why it's called the yo-yo diet.
Yes.
You go down, you go back higher. You go down, you go back higher.
Yes.
And that's why I've always said, if I could get a chance to be on The Biggest Loser, I know I would win. like I would be willing to give 100% of my winnings to charity because I know for an absolute fact I will win. Now, I won't be pulling somebody's horror story out from being a child and all. And by all means, I'm not making light of the mental scars.
Sure.
I say this all the time.
Sure.
When you're growing up and someone says something that's derogatory, I always use the analogy of a wooden fence.
Yes.
And every time somebody says something gnarly and nasty, you put that hole in the fence. And yeah, somebody can pull that nail out, but you still have that scar.
Yes.
And I don't ever take that lightly. But what I'm saying is on Biggest Loser, I don't need to rip those scars off. Mm-hmm. The reason why those scars come off is because they're getting overworked and they're sleep deprived and they're calorie deprived. And it just rips these emotions out. Now, I don't know about you guys. In all seriousness, I was in counseling for 15 years out of a 25-year marriage, right? My whole point is I don't need to relive all that. Now, that's me. And I went to counseling and realized some stuff needed to be addressed and some doesn't, right? Like I was put up for adoption. I was adopted by a great family. I could give two shits about going and finding who my real dad is because that was disrespectful to the dad who adopted me. That was my opinion, right? But I can sleep at night. I didn't need to know who my biological dad was. Still don't to this day. My father, unfortunately, is no longer with us, and that was my dad.
Yes.
But here's why I would win Biggest Loser. You let somebody sleep 9 hours. Oh, what a novel idea. You let them wake up without an alarm, so you don't catch them in REM 3 and they're in deep sleep and they're getting startled by an alarm and now cortisol dumps into the bloodstream. Let them gradually wake up. We go and we eat a nice balanced breakfast.
Yes.
3-4 eggs, some avocados, some extra virgin olive oil, whatever is your jam. Then we go to the pool and we put some sneakers on and we walk for 20 minutes in the pool. and we tread water for 20 minutes. If you're a swimmer, swim some laps for 20 minutes. And what you're doing is when you get in the pool, the hydrostatic pressure is keeping the heart rate low because the venous blood flow is coming back to the heart very easily. So the heart rate is always low. Well, what did we say earlier? How do you leverage stored body fat? Exercise at a lower heart rate. So you've slept 9 hours, your body's released HGH and testosterone. So you got to release the recovery hormones that melt body fat. Yes. You wake up, you immediately eat. So now you're fueling your next workout with high quality complex foods. You work out at a low intensity for no more than an hour. You get out of the pool and then we go relax. If you can fall asleep and nap for 2 hours, great, but just chill. If you can fall asleep, you get that extra dose of HGH and testosterone if we can get into REM 3 and a power nap. Then you wake up and we go for a walk. And we walk for an hour, not 3 hours, just walk for it. And we're not carrying a 100-pound bag, right? We're not doing all this other nonsense stuff. I'm trying not to blow your vertebrae out in your back. And then after that hour walk, you come back and you don't have 11 almonds and 3 cashews in a leaf of lettuce, right? You have a nice spread of carbs, protein, and fat. And then you read a book, no social media, no TV, no nothing. Do something that stimulates your brain. And then go to bed. And try to go to bed when you're tired and try to wake up when your body's. So now what we're doing is reestablishing circadian rhythm.
Yes.
We could have 10 people. I'm not saying everybody has to show up at 8 a.m. When you wake up, meet us at the pool.
Yeah.
And I will absolutely guarantee in 1 year, not only can I drop the body fat, but, and this is a fact, and you guys can Google this. Every single person that's won Biggest Loser, every single competitor has not only put on the weight that they lost, they actually went higher. Mm-hmm. It defines the yo-yo diet because you can't be yelled at and you can't be screamed at. We have an acronym that we use in our program. It's called the KISS program. Keep it simple and sustainable.
Yes.
When I said KISS, unfortunately, most of your listeners, first thing they thought was keep it simple, stupid. Right?
That's what we were taught growing up, wasn't it?
It's exactly what you said earlier. We're programmed in a certain way where we're like, oh, we have to use exercise for punishment for bad behavior associated with food.
Yeah.
Remember you were saying earlier, how do we break this vicious cycle? Yeah. You got to break the guilt punishment thing.
Yes. Agreed.
Because, and this is getting down into some deep blood chemistry, but it's true. Stress dries up the desire for simple sugars. Mm-hmm. It's a scientific fact. So when you go back to the very beginning of our conversation, what's the number one thing that's causing people to be obese? Stress. So, and I know there's going to be listeners that they maybe had a partner or a parent. Oh, you're just orally fixated. You can never, your portion control is uncontrollable.
Right.
Dude, you're stressing me out so bad, I'm going to eat that entire bag of potato chips.
Yes.
Because you're such a thorn in my side. You're literally driving me. Like I don't have portion control when my stress levels are through the roof.
Right.
Now I'm saying that to all the listeners. I want you to understand this is not you being a glutton. This isn't you being just, you can't manage your behavior. It's the environment around you. Now, again, we live in a world that everybody plays a victim, but I don't think anyone listening to your show is going to buy into that. They're like, no, I'm going to take responsibility. But go back to what the Olympic Training Center said. You can't argue with the principles of nutrition and you can't argue with the principles of physiology. But once we understand them and you start to work within the box, body fat drops, muscle mass goes up, sleeping goes up, stress goes down. And people are like, oh my goodness. I loved what you said earlier, Dr. D. Can you imagine actually not being tired? What a novelty.
Yeah.
What a novelty.
That should be the norm, even though it isn't the norm. Like, where did we get stuck?
Now, think about how vicious this is. We've gotten ourselves programmed that we're supposed to be miserable all the time. We're supposed to hate our jobs, hate our partners, be financially strapped, hate exercise, hate everybody around us. And then we wonder why we're fat. And we wonder why we're impatient and all joking aside, just all I always say is reverse engineer it.
Right.
Just reverse engineer it. Right. So you've got to start with the sleep. So what I always do with my clients, we get into more of the time management is we can't manage time. We can only manage ourselves. So if we block out, because you already know what time you have to start your day tomorrow. So very simple. Go back 8 hours from there and tuck yourself in bed by 9:30 because you've got to be out the door. Yeah.
No matter what.
And people say, oh, no, I can't do it. Okay, well, right there's the problem. And I say that very, very respectfully, right? You came to me and said that you're very frustrated with your body weight. I get it. I'm with you 100%. So what I'm going to ask you to do is show me where you're going to get 9 hours of sleep, at a minimum 8. I can't do it. I'm like, cool. We already found the problem. When you get that figured out, we can move on to step number 2. Yeah. And because I always tell people, like, I don't do long-term contracts. I do month to month on purpose, because I know I might not be everybody's cup of tea. I'm very structured. I'm very accountable. But I'm telling you, you need 8 hours of sleep. As soon as you tell me you can't give me 8 hours, that's cool. We're done.
Right.
Not because I'm like snubbing my nose at you. I just want you to know that that's the number one source to fix your frustrations, not me. I don't have a dog in this fight.
Right.
The idea is you've got to have 8 hours of sleep to release enough testosterone and HGH. Those are the hormones that melt body fat away. That's what rejuvenates the body. If you're somebody trying to build more muscle, sleep more. Now, of course, you got to feed it with amino acids, but you understand. Well, maybe I shouldn't make that assumption. Protein and fat are the only 2 macronutrients that are going to satisfy hunger. So when you go to bed, and again, I get a lot of pushback on this, but I can show you so much evidence. When you put protein and fat in your diet an hour before bed, assuming that you don't have any GI distress when you try to go to bed, if you can put protein and fat into your system before you go to bed, you're going to be just like an infant, and the protein and fat will bridge hunger for 8 to 9 hours. So now you bridge 9 hours, the body gets the high quality fats and oils. Now the body is releasing the hormones. The quality of the sleep goes up. Now you wake up with more energy to find a new job, correct your relationship issues, get out of debt, start wanting to exercise. Notice I use the word want to exercise.
Yes.
Please break the guilt punishment. I feel guilty because I ate this food. I'm going to punish myself with exercise. Stop.
Yes. We see that all the time.
Absolutely. And both of us would recognize that a lot of people eat out of stress. And that's where we're getting into the second vicious circle. You have the first one, and that is too much stress. And then the second one is we've got to get to that idea that you've got to break patterns.
Right.
Then so all we've done in the first initial step is find 9 hours, at least 8, preferably 9. I'm not saying don't have ice cream. I'm not saying don't have birthday cake. I'm not saying enjoy seasonal foods. But the idea here is when you start looking at food from a functional standpoint, okay, great. Now you're eating fruits, vegetables, and lean protein, and you're doing it every couple hours so your blood sugar levels are stabilized. Now you have the mental clarity to deal with the rogue boss, find a new job, deal with your relationship issues, come up with a plan to get out of debt. And then when you start seeing, because this is where momentum comes in, right?
Yes.
Now we start seeing incremental, but all we did was start with food and sleep. Notice I haven't even talked about exercise yet, because everyone's like, I got to go exercise. I'm like, you don't have time to exercise. You're adding too much stress. So the third thing that we do is we block out food. We block out sleep, number 1. We block out food. But when we block out food, we have to block out when you're going to buy it, when are you going to cook it, when are you going to pack it, and when are you going to consume it?
Yes.
This is a really, really gross science experiment. So I hope your listeners won't hate me after I ask them to do this. Next time you go to a restaurant, watch the table beside you eat. Number 1, they'll never take the utensil out of their hand. So what they're doing is they shovel it. They might bite and chew on it. My average that I've seen is 3.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying you have to turn it into baby mush, but when you understand that you start to absorb nutrients in the mouth. So what I always say is put the fork in your mouth, put the fork down and actually chew your food, which means no TV, no phone, adult conversation, talk to your children, right? Because what you're doing is you're starting that digestion here. And then you start the whole process of, okay, I'm not putting huge clumps of food in my belly. I don't need an antacid to try to help me digest food because I just simply chewed my food.
Yes.
This is another pet peeve of mine. For all the listeners right now, if you invited me to your house, if I walked in your kitchen, I should see nothing but food related. If you walk me into your bedroom, that bedroom should be nothing about rejuvenation, rest, sleep. Yeah. I shouldn't see a checkbook. I shouldn't see a treadmill. I shouldn't. Exactly. And I want you to think about this. This gets into deep psychology, but it's been proven over and over again. When your brain walks in a room, it's not sure what it wants you to do. So if I walk into my gym and then I see a computer, my brain's like, am I doing computer work or am I here to work out? If I'm in the kitchen and there's a TV, am I getting caught up on the news or am I making food and actually consuming food? When I walk in your bedroom, if I see a treadmill, am I working out or am I going to bed? If I see a textbook, now I do have some clients that live in upstate New York and their whole apartment is 800 square feet. But I know it sounds silly, but like we tuck the stretch cords behind something. So when you get ready to go to bed, you only see the bed. When you sit down to eat, you only eat. And then what we do is we say, okay, you've got to go to work. So you block out your food, you block out your sleep, you go to school or work or both. What's left in a day? Mm-hmm. Now, what I find always interesting is on all of our iPhones, we have the ability to go in and look at how much screen time you've been on. And I would encourage everybody to do it because I'll get somebody that says, I don't have 30 minutes in a day. Oh, I will bet you $1 million I can find 30 minutes in your day. It's called social media. Now, I have had some sarcastic, in a fun kind of way. I've had people say, well, I only use it when I'm on the restroom. Okay, fair enough. You win. But outside of the time that you're in the restroom on social media, like you were saying, I loved what you said earlier. When you're at a red light, don't grab your phone. Just focus on breathing. Get focused. Learn how to diaphragmatically breathe. A lot of people don't realize when you're under a lot of stress, you're breathing very shallow. That's why we stop. When you see somebody yawning, that's the body invoking the need for oxygen.
Yes.
Well, when you catch yourself yawning, you're probably hunched over, crunching the diaphragm, stressed out, shallow breathing, particularly for athletes. When you see them getting ready to go on the starting grid and somebody's yawning, that just shows you how nervous they are. I always use that as a whipping tool because I want my athletes to realize they're freaking out, right? They're starting. How do you know they're panicking? Because they're yawning. Now you put all that together. You go to work, you chew your food, you try to deal with your boss the best you can, or you're making alternative arrangements when you get home. You're sleeping and you're eating. Now, whatever time you have left, I've literally had somebody who said, I have 9 minutes on Tuesday. Cool. You get out of your car, you walk 4.5 minutes down the road, you come back 4.5 minutes. 9 minutes is what you gave me. 9 minutes we used it. And they go, that's nonsense. I'm like, look, let's just round that up to 10 minutes. If you do that 6 days in a week, you just walk for an hour in the course of a week. It adds up.
It does.
It adds up. But what you've got to do is put on your walking shoes before you leave the office. When you pull up into your driveway, let your family know that you're just going to walk 5 minutes down the road, literally 5 minutes. You don't have to run. Just enjoy. Get some vitamin D. Get some sunlight on you. Walk 5 minutes down, walk 5 minutes back, and then go inside. No one's going to go crazy in 10 minutes.
Yes.
Do that 6 days a week. You've got an hour. Look at your food. You're eating fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. But notice how we did it backwards. Notice that the walk was last. Mm-hmm. The walk is last because you're dealing with work. You're nailing it. You're owning it. You're controlling stress at work. You're eating and staying hydrated at work, reducing stress. You're sleeping 8-9 hours. You're reducing stress. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in that room so you maximize productivity and reduce stress. Now let's just see where the pieces start to fall.
Right.
Because now all of a sudden you're more efficient at work. You might be able to pick up an extra 5 minutes. Now you're walking 10 minutes out, 10 minutes back. Now we just got 2 hours and 6. And notice I always say 6 because I think the body needs 1 day of complete relaxation.
Yes.
And I get sick. You would love this, Dr. D. If I were to have you be on this side of the phone, I get more pushback in the off season in the 1 day of rest per week than I get any other pushback.
Wow.
And on the day of, well, and the 1 day of rest, I ask people, I go, so what is, I always call it your currency, right? Because we'll have people who are listening to this who have a young child, and that child's currency is M&Ms. Then you'll have someone who, they might have a 12 or a 13-year-old that's into sports and it's a baseball bat or a glove or a football. And then it turns into a cell phone, then it turns into a set of keys, and then our currency just changes. But the idea here is when you start adding all these elements up, right, what ends up happening is you start getting all of the pieces and parts that start to flow the right direction, and then the momentum starts to take over.
Yes.
And that's why it's so incredibly important is you've got to start with sleep, then you've got to piggyback that with food, then you unfortunately have to go to school and or work, and then work with what you've got left. And as soon as we start putting all those elements together, that's why I say to my coaches, and it is a little bit of a foul language, is, forget motivation, just focus on discipline.
Yeah.
Forget motivation. If you wait for motivation, it blows like the wind. motivation will never come. Hate to say that. You'll tell yourself, you'll try to convince yourself,
Mhm.
screw motivation, focus on getting disciplined. And you got to remember, and this is again goes against today's society, you've got to be selfish. Because if you don't get 9 hours sleep, no one's going to get it for you.
Yeah, we have a lot because we leave ourselves out of the equation, unfortunately.
Yes.
And the other thing that I think is really important about what you're saying is, you're talking about establishing very basic habits and then being consistent with those habits. And the reason why it works so well and the reason why it's sustainable is because it's not that quick fix, like you said, because then you're back to yo-yoing, whether it's your weight, whether it's your life, whether it's your energy, your stamina, or what have you. So the sustainability piece, that making those small changes over time and being consistent with them, I think is important.
It's huge. And I don't want to sound like I'm being snide in any way, but I don't know why people think they go to school and feel dumb. I don't know why people go to the gym and feel weak. I don't know why people go to the bank and feel broke. That's where everybody starts. Nobody goes to school smart, but you go to school to become smart. You don't wake up wealthy for the most part. You work your butt off, and you have to understand what living from paycheck to paycheck feels like before you're even going to appreciate when you do have a little bit of money in savings. You're never, nobody walks up to the gym and is strong. You go to the gym, you become stronger. And that's something that I always say to my coaches. And I say to them every single day, go fail. Mm-hmm. And the first time I say it to my young coaches, they get really offended because they see themselves as not being failures, right? They want to be the very best. And I'm like, no, go fail. And I get the same look in the, deer in the headlights look. And I go, what do you mean? I go, fear is on the other side of what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And when you find that, because what happens is, you find what you don't know, you solve it, you now become more knowledgeable, you just elevated your game.
That's right.
Like take your son racing motocross. You don't know what that tire can hold when you're going into a corner, leaning it over until you push the front end and you go, okay, that's too far. You get up, you go a little bit less than that, and then you're able to butter the corner. And we do that with strength. We do that with relationships, finances, and everything else. If you don't know anything about finances, that's why you're in the situation you're in. Acknowledge it.
Or you have a motocross kid.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the problem that we run into. And this is not to get on a political soapbox about public school system, but it's not about teaching kids to fail. It's like you have to stay in this little box. So the word failure has a negative connotation, but failure is that next level. And I want anybody, whether you consider yourself an athlete or not, I'll tell you what, we'll keep it on academia instead. If you make it to 12th grade in high school, and literally they gave you a first grade math sheet of paper, you're like, well, this is simple. Well, that's the whole illustration summed up in one.
Right.
You only know it because you were taught it and you used it and used it and used it and used it. So that linear education, you might be in algebra, trig, whatever you're in, right? But if you went back to your 1 + 1, 9 + 9, you would kind of scoff at that. And using your son as an example, I always say, if I take your son and I'm like, hey, look, I'm going to give you this little pill and we're going to be able to downsize you. And you can go all the way down to the 65 class. And I'm going to take you to Loretta's. By the way, that's our national championship for people who don't do moto. I guarantee your son would be confident going down to the 65 class. He doesn't care who's on the gate. If he takes all of his experience and he goes to 65, he is super confident. And I say, okay, now I'm going to give you this pill and you're going to line up with the pros this weekend. Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, what happened? Your confidence was there and now it evaporated. And that's what I always say to my coaches and all of our clients. Confidence could disappear like that because it's about perception. And that's why if we always embrace fear, the fear of failure, right around the fear of failure is the next level of knowledge, which elevates the game. That's why we do testing with our clients every 6 weeks.
I want you to say that again and say it slow because that was a really important sentence. Right around the corner.
Right around the corner. So when you get right to the edge of fear, what you recognize is fear is the end of your knowledge and the beginning of your next level of knowledge. And that next level of knowledge is where you elevate your game to that next output and capability. That's why I sincerely believe there's no end to human performance.
Yes.
And that's why we test our athletes every 6 weeks, because you've got to think about this. If Dr. D goes through our first round of assessments, and then she does the same round of assessment 6 weeks from now, and then she does it again in 6 weeks, and let's just say that the numbers improve by 10% from round 1 to 2, from round 2 to 3. You and I can have an adult conversation and say, are you a little fitter? The answer, of course, would be yes. My second question would be, are you a little bit more familiar? Because it's the same round of assessments, phase 1, 2, and 3, identical. Okay. So my question to you, this is where we get into the psychological side. Were your numbers better because you were fitter? Yes. Were your numbers better because you were more familiar and you knew what to expect? Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, then I get to phase number 3 and I get to really hold your feet to the fire. Did you put up a bigger number because you're fitter? Were you more familiar? Or did you have a different strategy? The first time you did it, you didn't know what to expect. You went out, you blew yourself up, you're on struggle bus. Second one, you kind of thought by number 3, you have a strategy. Well, phase 1, you had to face failure in the unknown. You got a little bit smarter as well as a little bit fitter. Now, we always say we put it in 4 pillars. You have to be prepared, fed, rested, hydrated. You have to be fit, strength, endurance, lactate tolerance. Then number 3 is you have to have a strategy. There's an inverse relationship. So if it's very fast, you can only do that for a long period of time. So for example, Usain Bolt, the fastest man for 100 meters, is not going to go win the marathon tomorrow because he's the fastest for 100 meters.
No.
It's the inverse relationship, right? So my point is your son goes out, he blows himself up in the first 2 laps of a 10-lap race like Loretta's. Is that a fitness issue? No, that was a strategical error. He raced at an intensity that was longer than he could sustain for the length of the race. That doesn't make you stupid. That's where familiarity and education comes in. That's why you've got to know what your boundaries are. And we have all kinds of science tools that we use. We have a formulation and a process that we use where people most of the time either train too easy or they train way too fast. So what ends up happening is you have failure on both ends of it. And you say, but Rob, isn't failure good? No, that's called lack of implementing a strategy. Let me give you an example, Dr. D. You say to me that you're an elite runner and you can run a 5K at a 6-minute pace. Well, when you and I go to the track to work on your speed, I'm not asking you to run a 4-minute mile. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you to run a 5:50 pace, which is just a smidge faster than your current race pace. And we might do a half-mile repeat, but at a 5:50 pace. And we might do 2 of them. Then we might do 4 quarters. And I'll have you run them at a 5:45 pace, just a little bit faster, but because the duration is shorter. And then when you go back to running the 5K, instead of you being at a 6-minute pace, we start to get the body comfortable at a 5:58. We don't try to go from 6 to 5.
Right.
The gap's too big, people fail, and they get frustrated, they give up. So you have to have a strategic approach, but you have to base it off of your number. Like we were saying with calories.
Yes.
I can always help somebody figure out calories if you're willing to invest in a wearable device like Garmin. Now we know what your calorie, because everybody's unique. Yes. Just like your sweat rate. One of our performance services that we have is we have a sweat rate analysis company where we actually have a device that you wear. We take that sweat profile, and I own a sports drink, and we take your sweat rate profile and we actually fabricate your personalized isotonic drink based on the profile of what you lose in your sweat.
That's great.
We do the same thing with blood lactate. We do the same thing with core body temperature. So all these performance services are just simply individual. That's all we're trying to do is find out what constitutes you as an individual that wants to be an athlete. And that's like I said at the beginning of the conversation, everybody, whether you've never been competitive a day in your life, you still are under the same principles of how much do you sweat? How much do you eat? How much do you sleep?
Yes.
That's really what it boils down to. Remember I said at the beginning of pillar number 1, you got to be fed, rested, and hydrated. You see how it comes full circle?
All the way back to where it all started.
Yeah, it is. That's why I so enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question for you.
Okay.
I always ask all of our guests, I always want everyone to have some actionable things. So if you could just sum it up, what are 3 actionable things that our listeners can begin to engage with right now to really move the dial?
I would start first and foremost, do everything you can to adjust your schedule. Try to get 8. Like I said, 9 would be ideal. Even if you're somebody who thinks you don't need it, I promise you your body will appreciate it. The more time you give the body to recover, rebuild muscle, because you got to think about it. We want from the inside bones to be denser, muscles to be stronger, tendons and ligaments, which are key anchors for movement. We just want you to be durable and resilient to injury. And the more time you spend in bed in deep sleep, that stronger body from the inside out is going to happen. Number 2, walk in the store, shop the perimeter. I'm not a hellfire and brimstone guy. When I do black beans and rice, yes, I'm getting the Goya black beans from the middle of the store. I'm not going to go soak my beans. That's just not my jam. But if I get 95 to 98% of my stuff out of the perimeter of the store, you're going to be golden there. And then the other one would be take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces you need to consume over a 10-hour period. So if I weigh 200 pounds, I need 100 ounces over a period. And my wife and I, we were at a gym in California, and every single mirror in the gym said, drink 1 gallon of water today. My wife weighs 95 pounds.
Wow.
Okay,
That's a lot of water.
So take the math backwards. A gallon of water is 128 ounces. The only person that should be drinking 128 ounces is somebody who weighs 256 pounds, because you take the body weight by 2, and that's how many ounces, and then spread that out over 8 to 10 hours. Now, by the way, if you get to 7 o'clock and you're 40 ounces behind, please don't drink 40 ounces, because you're going to get up 11 times and empty your bladder during the night. So then you negatively impact your ability to recover, because you have to keep emptying your bladder. It's just keep it simple. And again, maybe that would be the 4th little bonus is write the acronym, keep it simple and sustainable.
Yes.
And then the rest will take care of itself every time.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. This was a really fun conversation. I think it has definitely stimulated our listeners' beliefs and understanding how important it is to just kind of get back to the basics.
Absolutely.
We don't have to be all fancy with this, that, and the other. Like, let's cover those basic things first.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much. And for all the listeners, keep up the good work. Find that point of failure, embrace it, and use the word failure as replace it with new knowledge. Don't be afraid of it. Like I said, nobody goes to the gym strong, nobody goes to the bank rich, and nobody goes to school smart, but we all become that. It's just a matter of being willing to learn and just rephrasing the way that people describe failure. So just enjoy the journey. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And Coach Robb, where can they follow you, find out more about you? Where can they do that?
No, I appreciate it. The best place to start, if you're into the internet, website-wise, would be Coach Robb. Just remember there's 2 B's, coachrobb.com. If you're on Facebook, it's Robb Beams. And then on YouTube, we have all kinds of videos on, like you said earlier, strength, flexibility. I do concept videos like, should I use ice or heat when I hit the ground? And that on YouTube is Coach Robb, again with 2 B's, Coach Robb Beams. And then on Instagram, it's at Coach Robb Beams, all one word together. So I would love to answer any questions that you guys have. I think the world of Dr. D, and anything that we can collectively do for you, please lean in on us. Please understand that we're all in this together, and we mean that sincerely.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And I want to clarify, just for those who are listening, it's Beam, B-E-A-M, like Michael. That's what you got. And the S at the end.
Yeah, I always say like high beams on a car.
There you go. There you go. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of True Wellness with Dr. D. I look forward to seeing you all next week. This is Dr. D, reminding you to tune into your body, reconnect with what matters, and embrace the journey to true wellness. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's ready to redefine their health. Let's keep redefining wellness and empowering change together. See you next Thursday for the next episode drop.